All right, thank you everyone for being here tonight. How's everyone feeling? Good, you guys all look very energetic. So sisters and brothers, if we look back at what now seems like such a long time ago, the Egyptian Revolution took place. Students and workers joined together and ousted US-backed dictator Mubarak. It truly helped spark a light all across the world to create change and showed that through protest and through people power, much is possible. The people are not satisfied, however, with just cosmetic change, but only with real change that they have yet to see. Even here in the US, we have seen the growth and will discuss and have discussed the spreading movement, which is the Occupy movement, in different cities all across the country, largely inspired by the Egyptian people and their revolution. Although it has been months since the Egyptian people forced Hosni Mubarak from power, the revolution is far from over. The basic needs and wants of the revolution have not been met yet, and so we know that our Egyptian brothers and sisters will continue to fight. Like all great revolutions, this one has been unleashed, the pent-up anger, frustration, and demands of millions, bringing them into political life to debate the most important of all questions. What type of society and what type of government do we want, or do they want? While there was a common enemy bringing unity across the different sectors of society together, which was Mubarak, the answer to this question is much less clear. Many have called this the second phase of the revolution. Now the people have been forced to stand up again because the former elements of Mubarak's dictatorship still exist. The same system without the dictator. Egyptians are in the street with the message that getting rid of the dictator is not the same as getting rid of the dictatorship. The dictatorship, which is based on the rule of the military elite, a tiny clique of crony capitalists, with the backing, of course, of Washington, still controls all of the power in Egypt. The US-backed client regime, headed by the SCAF, which is the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, those forces are maneuvering around the clock to keep the Egyptian workers and young militants from taking the revolution to the next stage. Truly, this revolution and the people have yet stopped their fighting. This past July, Egyptians rallied under the banner of the Last Warning, calling for the resignation of Field Marshal Mohammed Tantawi. On November 18th, a massive rally was called by Islamic forces, demanding the end of military rule, which targeted the SCAF. Then, on November 19th, Tahrir Square became a war zone, protesters being on one side and riot and military police being on the other. More than a dozen protesters had set up tents. They were immediately attacked by the other repressive wing of the Egyptian military dictatorship, which is the CSF, the Central Security Forces. There's going to be a lot of acronyms, so bear with me, who destroyed the encampment and left some protesters dead. On November 23rd, tens of thousands rallied into Tahrir Square, chanting for Field Marshal to leave after he gave his speech. He had promised that the military would not intervene in politics and that SCAF would stick with their original plan to hold presidential elections in July 2013, which we all know is a sham. With the resignation of Sharif, who was prime minister, and his cabinet, this was not enough for the Egyptian people. The chance demanded the immediate resignation of Tantawi and SCAF and the immediate transition to civilian rule. So the CSF and military police fired tear gas, canisters containing expired CR gas, which once it's expired, it's even more lethal than what it was originally, and non-lethal ammunition as well as live ammunition. Within the rank and file of the CSF are hired thugs, which are kind of agitators who hurl rocks at protesters, which is a repressive tactic under Mubarak and under various other political agents. And, sorry, I lost my place. So they started also to make fires within Tahrir Square and surrounding buildings so that the state-owned media could, call the protesters out and glorify the actions of the CSF as necessary for the security of the country, which, we've seen mainstream media in all countries and all movements acts as an agent in the interest of the state, including here in the US. Amnesty International said in a report this past Tuesday, and quote, Egypt's military rulers have completely failed to live up to their promises to Egyptians to improve human rights and have instead been responsible for a catalog of abuses which in some cases exceed the records of Mubarak, end quote. So the latest mobilization is a result of repression by SCAF and CSF of the revolutionary movement in Egypt. SCAF claimed that it would deliver power to civilian rulers last September, but as we all know, it postponed that handout until the Constitution was modified to its liking, which, sounds pretty shady. Presidential elections were promised again for some time in 2013. The military had not agreed to surrender power at that time, however, to the parliament once it was elected or when the new constitution was drafted. So another factor bringing people onto the streets of Egypt are that the same methods of repression under Mubarak are still being used by the military and the Interior Ministry. Over 12,000 civilians have been held in military tribunals, which have targeted prominent revolutionary activists. The death tolls has piled up for those who have been killed. Thousands remain imprisoned, and the numbers just keep adding up as the days go by. SCAF announced the constitution, the continuation of the emergency law for national security and for the stability of the country, which obviously is not for the stability of the country. In reality, is to keep the status quo of the Mubarak dictatorship. So Egyptian workers and the protest movement have called for an end to anti-protest laws. These laws, which were passed in March, ban organizing, protesting, striking, and punish any violators with jail or fines up to 500,000 Egyptian pounds. 500,000 Egyptian pounds, just to repeat the amount because it's so absurd. Egyptians see the passage of anti-protest laws as a continuation of the old regime's tactics to crush independent unions and political parties that are being formed. Elections have taken place this week. I don't know if people have had the chance to been following them, and are said to have an unprecedented turnout. Sources from the Muslim Brotherhood are saying they have garnered over 40% of the vote of the first phase of voting, which it's one of their sources, so I don't know how legitimate that is, but the Muslim Brotherhood had formed an alliance with SCAF after the ousting of Mubarak. So the voting process is somewhat complex, as all voting processes are. They don't want people to really understand how they work. So I'm going to try to just briefly talk about what elections are going to take place at what time. So right now, the elections that just took place were over a few provinces, and that was the first round of voting. So other provinces will take their turns through December and early January for elections to the 508-member People's Assembly. Voting for the upper house or Shura Assembly of Parliament takes place after that. So right now they voted for the lower house. And the presidential elections is supposed to be held by mid-2012. About 50 million people are eligible to vote out of a population of an excess of 85 million, with candidates from 50 registered political parties. So there's a ton of people that are running as well. Preliminary results from the first phase of voting should be announced on Wednesday, but as I said, some various groups are already coming out with their own estimates and numbers. But the final makeup of the lower and upper house of the parliaments will not be clear until March, after all the voting has been done and counted. So really it is not clear what will be the result of these elections, and I think that it's really hard to say. But one thing is for sure, that the Egyptian people will not sit idly by. They will continue to fight and struggle because real change doesn't necessarily, or doesn't come through bourgeois elections. The Egyptian people have come a long way in their struggle for self-determination, independence, and civilian rule. For the Egyptian people, taking the streets again in massive numbers is the only way forward to successfully complete their revolution. And now let's briefly look at the role that the U.S. has had. So the U.S. government supported Mubarak for the past 30 years. Egypt still is the second largest recipient of U.S. economic military aid after Israel. According to the State Department website, the U.S. government gave $1.2 million in aid to Egypt in 2009 alone. Most of the aid was used by Mubarak's military to purchase tear gas, riot control agents, and associated equipment, which I assume that they're using on all the protesters now. The United States has truly one goal in the Middle East and North Africa: to install and maintain U.S.-friendly presidents and kings who serve U.S. geopolitical and economic interests in the region. Highlighting the illegitimacy of the ruling body are recent clashes with the police, who fired tear gas canisters at protesters with labels "Made in the U.S." A slogan that resounds with me, a basic demand from the Egyptian protesters, is bread, dignity, and democracy. The Egyptian revolution will continue to be a heroic journey that will inspire revolutionaries here in the U.S. to continue to struggle and to organize and fight until we win. I just want to point out really briefly as a side note that, Egypt is a genuine revolution, opposed to, say what has happened in Libya, and now we see Syria could be the next to fall under false pretense of, this all Arab Spring uprisings being real revolutions and putting everything into this one category. So we're actually going to talk about that next Friday in a much larger discussion. So hopefully people will come. That way we just, I just wanted to point that out so we kind of keep the discussion on Egypt for tonight. But just to end, long live the heroic Egyptian people, U.S. out of Africa, the Middle East, and everywhere. Thank you.